You know, Meredith, I'm so excited. You were an early forger into the whole native world at Forbes, and you've now gone to the venerable institution of the New York Times to bring your trade to their nice publication. And you know, I had the good fortune of being able to find some mock-up creative of what the new New York Times is going to look like. Here it is, folks, under Meredith. And yes, first of all, you'll notice in tabloid format, but what struck me was this fascinating Tom Friedman article on how Pepsi was going to help solve peace in the Middle East. Is this what we got?
I love that question. So, Terry, let me start by vigorously refuting the notion that native advertising has to erode consumer trust or compromise the wall that exists between editorial and advertising. I would argue that good native advertising respects the independence and the sanctity of journalism, and at the same time really kind of puts the onus on a reader to decide, do I want to engage with a marketer's content or not? And I'm going to say that in a different way, which is to say good native advertising is just not meant to be trickery. It's meant to be publishers sharing its storytelling tools with a marketer. And so I think the real question that you mean to be asking me is, how can a publisher who is sharing their storytelling tool set with a marketer maintain consumer trust and maybe even extend it? And I'm going to say the first way that they have to do that is by holding the marketers who tell stories on their platforms to the same standards that consumers hold them to. And those trust standards, I think, are very simply based on three things: tell the truth, be transparent about who's telling it, and add value to the conversation. So I want to break those three things down very quickly. What does truth mean in the context of editorial? I think simply it means getting to the consumer with the best possible information available on a topic, and ideally doing so with experts on the ground very close to the source of where that news is happening. What I just showed you is a hugely read New York Times story done a couple of months ago, a year after Benghazi, that was meant to bring kind of clarity and to a very complex topic that had a lot of confusion around it. That's the way we do truth. So what does that mean for marketer? How does a marketer do truth? I am not suggesting, I know you'll come back at me with this, that marketers should become investigative journalists, but what I am suggesting is that marketers, many of them, have deep domain expertise very close to where the center of where a story is happening, and they can use that. A good example of this from one of our early paid post partners, Intel, who chose to tell their own story on the New York Times this year during CES when the big talk was wearables. Intel basically said the real conversation here is how do fashion companies and technology companies come together, and they did that against the backdrop of our coverage. So that's how truth to a marketer, I think, means authentic expertise. The next issue is transparency, and by that I mean something very, very simple, and that is unambiguous disclosure. We meant to be unambiguous in naming the New York Times native platform paid post, no room for confusion. Also, no room for confusion in paid for and posted by, fill in the blank client, Dell in this case. So we think that really matters. We think unambiguous disclosure isn't just about labeling, it's also about who are the storytellers. And we think for publishers who don't want to erode trust, what you have to do is keep your news organization entirely separate from what you do for a marketer. So Terry, no Tom Friedman writing for Pepsi, but rather setting up a separate content organization that has the skills of your news organization. So trust matters, transparency matters, truth matters, transparency matters. The last one of these I think is the most important, and that is value. If a brand is going to publish on a venerable site like the Times or BuzzFeed or Forbes, or any of the other great native players out there, they really have to do something that informs the consumer, that entertains them, that tells them something that they don't know, and that's get beyond narrative, get beyond pitch. We had a great example of this launch at the end of the week last week, a paid post on the Times from Goldman Sachs. That was a simple, I'm going to say kind of beautiful, really interesting visual explanation of a complex topic, the capital markets, which, and I won't show you the whole thing, but what are the capital markets? How big are they? You know, how do they touch the world, who are the different actors within the capital markets. So this is taking the great New York Times infographic tool set and applying it to a place where a marketer has domain expertise. The real question is, will this garner as many page views and as much social engagement as a Times story? And while it's early, we would say so far so good on that. So Terry, if we're not going to erode trust, what is good native advertising going to do? I think it's going to do three things. It's a better business model for publishers, which helps us keep our editorial independence. It can make brands matter more as experts in the world. And last but not least, I think it gives consumers more of what they want, which is rich content.